sometimes it's better for me to just sit back, bite my tongue, and then in 4 years I'll be able to say what I want.
There has been a gradual institutionalization of this code of conduct, the effect of which is to prevent people from ventilating their views. Bright students won't put up with it.
Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith.
They stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber at Yale.
We disagree, we debate, and then at the end of the day, we remain friends.
Welcome everyone to Pod and Man at Yale. I'm the host, Ari Schaefer, Director of Communications here at the Buckley Institute. Today, I'm joined by Noah Torrance, a sophomore.
Hello.
And Blake Freeman, a freshman.
Hi, I'm also excited to be here.
Thanks for joining us on Pod and Man at Yale. So today we're going to talk about higher ed, its problems, its solutions, and your guys' perspective, as Yale students on both Yale and higher education in America. So we'll start at the beginning. When you look at a place like Yale, how would you answer the question of what a university is for? Noah, you want to start us?
Sure. Most importantly for me, there's kind of two things. First is the people that graduate from the university should be prepared to, contribute to a society. And two, that a university is sort of moving society forward or working towards moving society forward, whether it be through research, whether it be through cultivating the minds of students.
I totally agree. I think the university is designed to teach people the skills they need to function in society, as Noah said, also to work in academia and to produce work in academia. And I think they also serve this unique purpose of being this hotspot where people can gather, share their ideas, and kind of be like sort of a centralized location for knowledge in the United States.
So, Blake, I'll ask you both this because Noah kind of mentioned it. And this is something Yale talks about, and universities in general talk about the idea of the university itself being an agent of positive change in the world as an institution. Is that something you guys think is important?
Yeah, I think that since the university is producing knowledge, right? Universities in the past have produced the knowledge to create medicine, to go to space, to do all these things that have definitely helped out human civilization, and to have people whose only job is to get to the bottom of how the world works and what we can do with what we have. I think it's incredibly important, and I think it historically has served the United States and served the world at a larger scale in a very positive way. And I think it should continue to do that and be empowered to do that as well.
So Blake, just kind of follow up. Do you think it should be the medium of impacting the world, or the way a university impacts the world should be through the research that its faculty does? Or do you think the institution itself should kind of, we talk about institutional neutrality or university taking positions. How do you see that kind of trade-off? Do you like one more than the other? Do you like both?
I like both. I think it does both. The research is, a big part of the university, but also giving people the chance to interact with people with very different mindsets is beneficial as we kind of progress as a civilization. We get to examine our worldviews. We get to see how they shape up with others. We get to work on our rhetoric. That's something that I've really loved about Yale, is that I've been able to see how my worldview stacks against other people. I think that makes me a better person. I think it makes the other person a better person. And people leave the institution more prepared to have those conversations and more confident in what they believe in as well.
So I want to ask, you guys answered the questions very well, but it kind of sounded like you answered them almost from a policy wonk perspective. So, that was a compliment. But I'm going to ask you on the other side, on the personal perspective. When you went to Yale, right, when you went to college, obviously for a lot of Yale students, very ambitious, you want to make an impact on the world. Yale's a great school to go to. It's kind of a feather in your cap, so to speak. But you also go to Yale for, you have personal reasons, the things you want to get out of your Yale experience. In that sense, what did you see in Yale? What did you see as the college experience more generally that you want to get out of it and you want to experience while you're at Yale?
Well, I'll tell you that when I was looking for universities that I wanted to go to, and I was eventually selecting Yale, I was looking for the school that would specifically let me study engineering while taking the most non-engineering related classes. I was specifically looked at other universities, and I was just engineering's great and it's important, but I really love the liberal arts education that Yale focuses on. Because it's just interesting. It's cool to take a class on history. It's cool to take a class on literature. I took a class recently. I was telling Noah about this. It's a it's a science policy class where it's combining like, government federal funding with research. And I thought that was really interesting. I'm taking classes this semester on like China, on like Greek literature. I would have never experienced these sort of things had it not be for like the liberal arts education that universities and specifically Yale bring. And so that's what really drew me to where I am right now.
How about you, Noah? What do you think is kind of like the big purpose of your education?
Oh, man. Well, this is a little strange to say, I know, but I think the reason why I've come to college and the thing that I want to get out of college is just practice at being a good person and maybe, if possible, learning to become a better person. Yale, I think, is very uniquely situated for this in the sense that it brings together a lot of different people that aren't necessarily afraid to shy away from sharing problems that they have with one another and problems that they have with the ways that people live and the ways that you might be living. Some of my suite mates have given me some pretty lovely feedback on what I do in my life, and I really appreciate it because I think the last thing that I want is an echo chamber or to be kind of insulated in my own ways of thought. I think it is definitely, maybe not everyone goes through Yale constantly being like challenged in some way, but I think I definitely have. And the spaces that I've found in Yale, like the Buckley Institute, do a really great job of that.
So you've both kind of mentioned that concept of, or that experience that you've had your opinions, your ideas stacked up against other people. You may argue about them, or maybe not get into like full yelling debates, but you've been bouncing your perspectives on that. I think there is an idea in the wider in the country, in the national debate that that doesn't happen very often on campus. It sounds like that's something you guys see day to day, Blake?
Yeah, I have really seen like positive dialogue between me and my peers. Going into Yale, I was very worried about that. I saw like the campus protests and I saw what was going on, specifically like with Israel and Palestine. I was very concerned with like the culture I was about to enter into. But having been here for a semester, and I'm sure Noah can comment on this as well, it's just like I've had so many conversations with people who see the world differently, and everyone's been in a position where they're like excited to talk about different things and they're excited to bring things up. And Yale specifically, it markets itself as like a society of friends. And that's what I've seen. Is like it's this collection of people who do love each other and are excited to talk about their differences. But ultimately, like this is like purely my perspective, and I'm sure it's not reflective of like Yale as a whole or what other students might say. But I've seen had very positive conversations with people, and I think that it's been doing its job.
How about you, Noah?
I agree with actually I would say every single thing that Blake just said. I can't say that my experience is universal of Yale students, but I can say that my experience has certainly been an A+.
The administration does a really good job of that. Like I remember when I got to Yale, all of the undergrads had to go through this lecture that was talking about
was this the ways of knowing?
I think so, yeah. Or it was like this free speech like thing, and they were talking about like if you want to facilitate like a riot essentially, or if you want to facilitate like a protest. I think it was protest is a better word, but if you want to facilitate a protest, like contact this office. And I thought that was really interesting that like they have like ways to facilitate protests on Yale's campus, which I think, and my initial reaction was like, this is insane. Like this is a room full of crazy people who are just like inciting violence all over the place. But when I thought about it more, I was like, this is kind of cool because it's like, okay, we expect our students to be active. We expect our students to be vocal about the things they care about, but we're going to like set up this framework where they're able to do it in a very constructive way. And I think that culture has really like propagated through the student body as a whole.
Have you guys had conversations with other people, other peers and at Yale, friends on like really hot button issues?
Well, I've only been here for a semester, so I'm part of the YPU, and so we've talked about different things, but in terms of like current events, not so much personally.
Well,
I've mentioned that I have a very, very fortuitous group of suite mates that I live with.
I need to meet these guys.
Wait, they're so lovely. But long story short, we talk about everything. I don't think there's a topic under the sun that we haven't had a discussion till 4 a.m. about. And I will say, I think this might be kind of a thing that a lot of students go through, but when especially freshmen get here in the first couple of weeks, I think that's when a lot of the excitement happens.
Yeah.
Where people are just so excited to talk to each other and reach out and find different perspectives. So as someone from a sort of smaller town, not really that small, but still smaller, I felt like I was like so many people were asking me about my experience and were like wondering about it. And then it was kind of the first time that's happened to me. But then I was on the other side of that too. There were so many other interesting people, and then everyone found each other so interesting. And there was not a single day that I wasn't up till 4 a.m. just chatting with someone for the first week and a half of the school here.
When did you sleep?
I had 4 a.m. to like 7 a.m. Like, there's time. I've gotten better with my sleep, I will say. Especially at the outset, people just are really curious, and I think that's pretty universal of Yale students. And there are barriers to curiosity, but Yale students are very good at taking them down.
I mean, I'm glad you guys have had this great experience. You've been able to have open discussion, especially with your peers, especially with your suite mates. Sounds like you got a very fun group.
I do.
So there is this national debate, though. Obviously, it's impossible to miss, especially if you're at Yale. That assumes that there is something wrong at the university, right? There is something wrong at Yale. Buckley ourselves, we've been pretty critical of the kind of ideological imbalance and how students do feel like one side is preferenced over the other. But you guys don't necessarily have to agree to that. Do you think there is a problem in higher education? Do you think there's a problem in Yale, or do you think things are fine? Noah?
Well, I understand. Okay, so just to put some like concrete terms, I guess the problem that I think a lot of people see with higher education is that because it is a very like left-leaning space, people with Republican, or I guess you could just say right-wing ideas, they feel a sort of like societal pressure that blocks them from expressing their opinions. And there is definitely a very heavy culture of or a left culture here on Yale. I think in some cases, maybe that could 100% manifest in some sort of inhibition of actual like spreading of alternative viewpoints. But I will go to say that the people here that are comfortable sharing their conservative views and just going toe-to-toe with Democrats are very, very, very ubiquitous. Like, they're everywhere, at least in my experience. I don't know, what do you think?
No, totally. Because, like, when I got here, again, I thought the same thing as Noah's. Like, this is a very left-leaning space. And then when I arrived, it's like all the conservatives just kind of come out of the woodworks to fight for their space on Yale. And I think that's great. But in terms of, like, this problem with like higher education, when I was growing up, I knew people who like thought it was like a better idea to be a garbage collector than to go to university. And I think that's because university has gotten this bad rap of facilitating research and working on projects that the American people don't really see as like useful. The most common example of this is like the gender studies department at like a university. It's like some people see this as like the biggest waste of time, and they're like, you should be an electrician, you should do a trade, you should go to trade school, not incur all this debt so that you can do something kind of productive and useful. And I think that sort of it's disappointing to me because universities do useful things and great things all the time. Like they get Nobel Prizes in quantum mechanics, but like the American people don't see quantum mechanics. They see the plumber who works in their house, and they think like, this person's actually providing a lot of value to me. I don't know how this Nobel Prize laureate is. And so is there something wrong in the institution? I think the American perception is like they're working on things that aren't like very practical. In the decades of, or the years of penicillin and the years of like this like groundbreaking important research has kind of lost its foothold on the American idea of the university. I don't think that means that we need to change universities, but we definitely need to like fix this perception, is my take. So
a lot of the criticism of the university kind of revolved around the post-October 7th response on campus. Yeah. And, if you talk to a lot of conservatives, they'll say, this has been a problem for a while, and October 7th just kind of made it abundantly clear to everyone. So as Blake, I'll ask you first because you gave the last comment. Do you think like that is an aberration from what, like, not representative of what the undergraduate experience is like? Or do you think of like that showed something that's a clear problem that needs to be addressed?
I think that college students since Vietnam have been protesting and getting riled up about the global affairs like this entire time. But I think it struck a chord with a lot of people in the United States because like we saw like universities telling their Jewish students that they couldn't come to campus because it was too dangerous. And it felt like for a lot of people that they were essentially like kicking off like their students because like there's this other ideology that's taking foothold. I know that definitely like the way that universities approach this situation in terms of how they administered it definitely like made me feel uncomfortable to apply to them, much less to even like go to them or participate in them. I think that like this like outburst of like protests and riot on universities' campuses is like not a new thing. But I think this like recent example of how they've handled the Israel and Palestine situation in such a very like not helpful way to students and allowing like a very disruptive force on students to like negatively impact the students that are just like trying to go to math class. Like everyone saw this and it was like, this is not education anymore. This is just like a public park where people do what they want, but this is not serving like a greater good. And so it hurt this reputation that American universities had.
How about you, Noah? Was the concern that the country had about the reaction on campus to October 7th a legitimate concern about an aberration from the university experience? Or is that something that you think universities still need to work on?
Okay, so the protest that happened on Yale campus, there was as many know, there was a very large encampment, which was actually in the months that I was applying to Yale, so it was before my time. But it is interesting that the pretty much dominant opinion on these protests and on the organization that was running these protests was that and this is an opinion that I think is pretty unanimous, is that it really descended into a mob groupthink territory where even dialogue among the organization was being disapproved of. And I have many friends who were very involved within the post-October 7th protests at Yale originally that completely stepped away from the organization because of this groupthink. I don't know. I think that is one of the most concerning thing that happened, was just that people weren't really taking into account how they might be going about these protests in a way that I think was ultimately unsuccessful.
So I guess Blake mentioned this earlier, or touched on this earlier. And people have talked about this, how protest has been a part of kind of the college experience. To think about Vietnam is a classic. You see students occupying buildings. Was these protests within the normal realm? Did you guys feel like, okay, this is what college students do, they protest, and like the national, frustration, congressional frustration about it, the congressional hearings, to university presidents lost their jobs, like, is this overwrought?
So I've been doing research on I'm in Navy ROTC, and the little fact about Yale NROTC program was that it's been around since the very beginning. Like one of the first NROTC units was at Yale. But during Vietnam, because of the riots and the protests and the outrage that was going on, they had to kick off their students. And they completely threw out the unit, and it was really, that idea was really disturbing to me. And then I kind of saw this again with how we responded to Israel and Palestine. The university is allowing free speech, they're encouraging free speech, and it's good that they're doing that. But then it gets really rowdy, but then the response is to just kick off the students that are being affected by it, because they are there's the possibility that they could get attacked, or their schedule is disrupted. And I just think this is the wrong approach. They allow free speech and then just shut it down, and not in a very productive or civil way.
So if you were president in 2023, 2024, president of Yale, how would you have handled the protests? How about you, Noah? You were here on campus for some of the protests. If you were president,
very, very briefly, I was actually doing a a campus tour. Sorry.
Oh, really? Through one of the protests?
Through the Beinecke encampment. I was like, what's
wow.
going on over here? So many students, are they camping? Sorry.
That's interesting.
So how would you have handled the protest? Would it be any different than how Yale handled it? How do these other campuses handle it?
I think important to acknowledge that this is really far out of my wheelhouse. So I will have to say I am both unsure that I could do any better than former Yale presidents and the current Yale president, Maureen McInnes, or any other student or college president. And I also am unsure, or part of me thinks I might do worse. But if I was put in this scenario, I do think that I would want to start with empathy for as many people involved as possible. I think it's understandable that students are outraged, but I do think that with what you do with that outrage has to have a limit. And when it comes to the point of making other students uncomfortable, then that you need to take steps to find ways to turn the outrage into something productive. In other words, like a debate. And maybe not, instead of yelling at each other, maybe we're speaking with each other. I think that's a little more productive. And this might be naive, but find ways to create spaces where you can have dialogue that is actual dialogue.
Thanks so much for joining us on Pod and Man at Yale.
Thank you so much for having us.
much.
It was a blast.
Yes, thank you.
Now an interview with Dr. Jacob Howland, former provost and professor at University of Austin. Welcome everyone to Pod and Man at Yale. I'm joined today by Dr. Jacob Howland. Dr. Howland is a former provost, senior vice president for academic affairs, and dean of intellectual foundations at the University of Austin, and was previously McFarland Professor of Philosophy Emeritus at the University of Tulsa, where he taught from 1988 to 2020. He's written several books and been published widely in the New Criterion, Newsweek, the New York Post, and other outlets. Dr. Howland, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, Ari. Thank you.
Well, I know you, like I mentioned, you spent a little bit of time at University of Austin, which was, made waves for trying to reform higher ed. We've seen a lot of discussion about the state of higher ed, the state of the students, the state of student body. What do you think of the general discussion, where the country is at and looking at ways to fix America's, higher education system?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that higher ed needs to be fixed. I would point to the fact that over the last 5 years, there have been three sort of waves of crisis in higher ed. The first was COVID in 2020. Universities continued to charge full tuition in many cases for an inferior product. Everybody went on Zoom. In many cases, students would be present as like a black square. And so you didn't have this kind of in-person discussion and interaction, and students were separated from the intellectual community. The next wave of crisis was October 7th. And there, I think Americans realized that, what's going on in universities is really deplorable. It looked like ideological indoctrination had replaced open inquiry, and certainly civil discourse, which is a fundamental value, in my view, of higher education, had been replaced by sort of, Jewish students were being intimidated on campus, in some cases physically threatened or even assaulted. And that was really an eye-opening experience. And then now the third wave of crisis may be the biggest of all, which is artificial intelligence, because students are relying on things like ChatGPT to do their papers and do their homework. In many cases, with bad conscience. There was an article in New York Magazine by an administrator at NYU, and she was citing students who felt very, very guilty about. They were sort of addicted to it. They weren't able to do their work without relying on these resources. And so all those things put together, and also I would say the sort of deplorable demonstration of the presidents of Harvard and MIT and Penn when they were asked in Congress about do you condemn these kinds of anti-Semitic remarks and so forth. What I think has been lost is the understanding, particularly on the part of academic administrators, but also I think faculty and students, of what a university is, what an education is, what is a university for. Today, what we're seeing with the Trump administration is external pressure. And in fact, There was a document produced by AAUP right after it was founded. I think it was in 1915. And the claim was made that if universities stray from their fundamental mission, which from my point of view is the preservation, extension, and transmission of knowledge and wisdom, right? Sort of the grateful reception of the hard-earned insights that our ancestors have achieved and passed down to us. When they stray from that, this document produced by the AAUP said, outside forces will intervene. And that's what's happening right now with the Trump administration. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's adequate. I think that reformation has to occur within the university, and I'm happy to talk about that a little further.
You touched on so much there, but there's one question I just wanted to ask you straight out, because I know sometimes we talk about this and we talk about what's being done. We look at, this is what's going on campus, this is what's going on campus, and we kind of, I guess, lose sight of the central question. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, and I want to ask you straight out, is something wrong with our higher ed system, and what is it?
I think, first of all, we have the phrase higher ed. Let's think about what higher means here. There are many reasons to get a university education. One legitimate reason is to acquire skills that will allow you, acquire marketable skills, and a credential that certifies that you have, in fact, acquired those skills. But that doesn't make it higher. And I think one of the things that is very distressing to me is there's a kind of flattening. The classroom has been invaded by political or ideological positions, and very popular is this notion that all human relations are relations of power, identity figures into that, and a loss, if I may put it this way, of transcendence in higher education. So thinking about eternal questions and fundamental questions, teaching students that the now, right, this instant, is just one point in the sort of tapestry of human existence, and that we do not, in fact, possess the ability or even the right, really, to stand in judgment of all past ages. And I think that there's a kind of dogmatic hardness to many of the attitudes that are displayed by students, that are inculcated by faculty, that administrators also kind of have some responsibility for producing on campus. You mentioned I was at the University of Austin and worked with a team to found that university. And our idea there was that a university should be a place where one quests for truth. Questions are more important than answers. And what needs to happen is that the classroom has to be a place of civil discourse, open inquiry, right? And it should transcend politics. I guess one way to point to the problem of higher education, it's almost as if, and I'm sure your listeners are familiar with the allegory of the cave in Plato, right? That we're prisoners in a cave, but there's an outside world that we're unaware of. It's almost as if this contemporary perspective on human existence as a set of power relations and competing identities has, so to speak, sealed off the cave, right? And what makes higher education higher is this access to the higher things, to questions of human meaning, to questions of human flourishing, to the development of what you might call a philosophical or theological anthropology. And so that the ceiling lifts up, and you begin to expand, you begin to realize that there's a past and it's very big and it has formed us. And there's a future, and the future, from my point of view, always grows out of the soil of the past. If we look at sort of the most creative geniuses in music and literature and so forth, they're very well acquainted with what came before. And that plants seeds in their mind and their hearts and their souls that then kind of grow and flourish into some new, often original and creative accomplishment. And the same thing's true of science. So I think that one image would be sort of like, students come in and they're just a point, and then they realize there are all these axes. There's the x-axis, the y-axis. You can look around, you can see what other human beings are doing. You can look at the past and the future, and there's the z-axis, which what is above and what is below. And that expansiveness, I think, is essential to higher education, and I think that we've lost that to a great extent.
But if you're someone who thinks differently than campus orthodoxy, looking, at the possibility of academia, a lot of conservative students say this. So why would I waste my time? There are no faculty positions. I'm not going to be able to get a PhD, let alone get a full-time job afterwards. Is that something you think is a serious concern? And, how bad is that?
Well, I certainly think it's a serious concern. I mean, you just need to look at the statistics. I remember looking at somebody had done a study of something like, let's say, 25 top liberal arts colleges and how many conservatives were in, various departments. And as you might expect, STEM was the most highly represented in terms of conservatives because although it has become politicized recently. But even there, the ratio was something like 3 liberals to 1 conservative. Incidentally, I should interject here and say that I think that political affiliation can't be mapped on completely to intellectual diversity, but it is one indication, right? But anyway, it went all the way down to, 70 to 1 in some departments. And then I think in sociology, anthropology, things like this, they found like no conservative professors out of 100 or something like that.
Like we did a study of Yale and found the same.
Right.
Faculty, similar numbers.
So I think that's a problem. But I want to say something about faculty hiring, and I'm actually sort of most proud of this. When we set up the University of Austin, we had to immediately hire something like 15 professors. And the way the timetable worked out, we had only a couple of months to do that. And we came up with the following idea. We want to build an intellectual community. And a community, of course, is, not just an aggregate of different sort of atomized individuals, but we were looking for people that would interact with each other, that we would want to learn from as colleagues. So what we did is we had group interviews. We would bring in 6 people at a time, and we would have them make short presentations. And so let's say in the morning, candidates 1, 2, and 3 are making presentations. Candidates 4, 5, and 6 were required to ask the first questions of each of those speakers. And so we would put together, let's say, someone who's a mathematician with someone who's an expert on John Milton, right? Can the mathematician make clear why his or her mathematics is essential and important? Can the Milton person ask an intelligent question of the mathematician? I love this, by the way. It's economical. The faculty who interviewed loved it. It was like a day-long seminar of all these different things. It was really delightful. But what we were doing was, selecting people for an intellectual community. And I think that's really important. And I would suggest that conservatives, if we have this kind of reform, and if universities begin thinking in terms of creating the intellectual community that universities claim to be, then I think that, there is a real opening for conservatives, because the question then becomes not so much like, again, on the aggregate, how many conservatives do we have? How many liberals do we have? But are you the kind of person who can contribute to a broad conversation? And even if you're on the left, and by the way, we do have some professors, well, I'm no longer with the University of Austin, but there are still professors there who are explicitly on the left. But they're still there because they have found that the atmosphere is such that they have a place, right? And it's because both the students and the faculty understand the place to be an intellectual community.
When you talked about, I'm going to go back a little bit because I want to talk about this before. You talked about like the kind of 3 crises that kind of hit the university. You talked about COVID, which I thought, kind of hits like the value. Like, what is the value of what I'm getting?
Exactly.
Right? You talked about October 7th, which kind of hits like the culture and the environment on campus. And then the last one, the AI is like the credibility of the students themselves.
Yes.
And then you kind of add in, we see these studies like we did where it looks at the bias of the faculty and how that fits in. And it just does seem like higher ed is getting hit everywhere.
Yes.
And not just kind of complaints online from this side to the other side. These are substantive issues. Now the response to October 7th, people wonder like, what is going on in these campuses, right? COVID, why should I pay $80,000 a year to have Zoom school?
Yes.
What can a university do? What do universities need to do to kind of build back some of that confidence, and can they as they're currently structured?
Yeah, I mean, we could go on and list other problems. And you mentioned $80,000 a year. I mean, the kind of skyrocketing tuition and so forth. I think that universities can, well, first of all, again, leaders need to be very clear about what a university is or what their university is, right? What is it we're trying to accomplish? Number 2, I think that we can, with regard to this question of intellectual diversity, civil discourse, open inquiry, pursuit of truth, universities can, for example, model, number 1, what that kind of open inquiry with intellectual diversity looks like. Okay. And I'm not sure, maybe during orientation, you bring in, I don't know, Robbie George and Cornel West or something, people with opposite positions who are friends,
Right.
and model that kind of argumentation. I think that teaching awards, incidentally, should be geared toward people who actually do this in the classroom, right? Mm-hmm. I think that you can, and universities need to throw some money at this. We should hold up and celebrate professors who actually create the conditions for real learning, such as I've described, open inquiry, civil discourse, whose syllabi reflect all positions, who privilege the questions. From my point of view, any teaching award should include that sort of thing in their criteria. And then there's also the accreditors. Accreditation needs to be reformed, and I think it is being reformed in some ways. A couple of years ago, when I looked at the accreditors, there are essentially 6 national accreditors who work with 4-year institutions. There are actually 7, but the 7th just works with community colleges. And all 6 of them, in one way or another, sometimes explicitly, like the first thing they said about themselves, but sometimes, sort of buried, wanted to advance DEI. And in many cases, it was DEI, a whole university approach. Everything should be DEI. I think that's highly misguided. But one of the reforms that accreditors can undertake is going to a university and saying, do you have intellectual diversity? Do you have civil discourse? Do you have open inquiry? And if you do not, that threatens your accreditation. I think that's very important. So that's a combination of kind of internal things that can be done and then external pressure.
Do you think, where's the momentum for this kind of thing? Obviously, I think since October 7th in particular, like the momentum shifted. But at the end of the day, you have a lot of faculty who like their positions the way they are. They like their department the way it is. Administrators who think a certain way like to be around people who think like them. Is there momentum for change? And, what do you, based on your experience with the faculty lounge, what is it like? What's it like on the inside?
Well, I mean, what it's like on the inside is it's rough. I mean, I've been thinking about, I came to the University of Tulsa in 1988, and shortly after I got there, I remember meeting a young woman, and she said, what do you teach and so forth? And I said, well, Plato and Aristotle, ancient Greeks, etc. I said, well, what do you do? And she said, well, I sure as hell don't teach dead white males. And that was, again, that's 35 years ago, right? So this kind of thing has been long in the making, and I could give you many other examples, but the problems are really enormous because, first of all, we have administrative bloat, and administrators tend to be, well, it's often the case that Americans will say, oh, it's the faculty, right? Mm-hmm. The administrations are often just as much to blame because you've got, student life people and deans of students and so forth who are sort of working on the ground level with students. And very often they're highly politicized and ideological. Mm-hmm. So it's a very big problem. But at least what we're doing now is we're having these conversations. These are public conversations, and there is impetus from the administration. And sometimes it's very heavy-handed, but that's okay. The courts will sort out things and say, well, the Trump administration can't do this or it can't do that. But nonetheless, something needs to change. And what can't go on forever won't. It's simply not the case that tuition can continue to rise and rise and rise, and the costs can continue to go up with a relatively inferior product for what people are paying for. That system's not going to work.
So I want to ask you one question. This is going to be a little bit of a curveball. Mm-hmm. Apologize. Just something I've been thinking about in the past couple of weeks, months. What's kind of the next thing that people need to be worried about, right? When October 7th happened, people have been talking about DEI for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Talking about for this kind of like oppressor press narrative here and there for years. From obviously on the supportive side, it had been inculcated into education, but then after October 7th, it's like, oh my God, what is all this stuff? This is as bad as it is. Yeah. But it had been again years, decades in the making. What's the next thing that you think at some point might blow up that people said like, why haven't we been working on this for?
Yeah. Well, to go back to the back to my three crises. I opined earlier that the AI thing might be the biggest crisis, because if it is the case, which I'm convinced it is, that many students, perhaps the majority, perhaps in some cases almost all of them, and not just students, by the way, professors too, are relying on AI to do their work, then what we're going to have is students graduating essentially from what are now just diploma mills. That is to say, you can go to a university, you can, as one student said in an article on AI, I can earn amazing grades without doing any work, right? And I'm going to get a diploma. What does the diploma signify? It does not signify that you have acquired fundamental skills, right? Whether these are liberal arts skills like critical thinking and learning how to write and read, or whether they're more specific, engineering and things like this. And that's going to cause a kind of collapse, because, if you have students graduating who actually don't know anything, that throws a wrench into the gears of the economy, and that's just not going to work. So I think that's one place where we're going to see a developing crisis that's going to force change.
Well, Dr. Howland, thank you so much for your thoughts. It was a great discussion. Appreciate you coming on Pod and Man at Yale.
So glad to be here, Ari. Thanks for having me.
That wraps up another great episode of Pod and Man at Yale. Thanks always for listening in, and always remember, for God, for country, and for Yale, in that order.